Opiates, opioids, and the problems they cause are in the headlines daily, but this drug's use actually started thousands of years ago.
In this week's episode, we explore Suboxone and the drug company's role in the opiate crisis, with guest commentary from Dr. John Kelly, Dr. Anna Lembke, and addiction specialist Bob Forrest.
And now DrDrew.com presents The History of Opium. It's estimated that current opioid crisis claims over 100 lives every day and costs billions of dollars annually. This, of course, is a tantalizing problem for pharmaceutical companies to attempt to, quote, solve. Over the years, researchers have identified drugs that are useful in treating addicts, but they are not a panacea. They may be helpful at managing symptoms of withdrawal. They may offer addicts an opportunity for some normalcy in their lives, but these drugs come with their own issues. They can range from annoying to debilitating. Addicts all have a lifetime challenge with maintaining sobriety. This begs the question, should drugs that are highly addictive ever be used to treat addiction? Dr. Anna Lembke.
Well, I think it certainly can be taken too far and has already been taken too far. I mean, just like we've had, pill mill clinics for oxycodone, we have pill mill clinics for Suboxone or buprenorphine in various formulations. So my personal belief is that it is a very effective harm reduction strategy, but that it needs to be administered with a whole bunch of caution and monitoring and education and a very low threshold for thinking about misuse and diversion. I think the evidence is overwhelming that buprenorphine works for people who are severely opioid addicted. And my own clinical experience reinforces that. But I personally, the way some people talk, you think, it sounds like we should put it in the drinking water. And I'm not in that category at all. In fact, I would say that in general, I'm very conservative when it comes to any medications to treat any mental health disorder. But having said that, I do believe that buprenorphine naloxone can be life-changing for people with severe opioid addiction.
Well, the era of medication-assisted treatment was ushered onto the addiction treatment scene by Dr. Marie Neiswender, as I've told you, and her husband, Dr. Vincent Dole. They reported they treated addicts successfully with methadone, and it was marketed for years for treating opioid disorders. In fact, it is still widely used. Advocates claim that methadone allows people to function more normally while dealing with their addictions. Opponents argue that treating drug addictions with other highly addictive drugs is at best a deeply flawed strategy. Another polarizing aspect about the drug is that methadone patients are required to show up at a treatment center every day in order to receive their medication. This is done primarily to prevent diversion, the misuse of the drug or giving it to other people, and to limit the amount of drugs patients have access to. With this delivery method, it is often regarded as inconvenient and leaves some patients feeling demoralized, tethered to a treatment center, and it's a kind of an enslavement. So this is where Suboxone entered the scene. More recently, this is a prescription drug of choice for addiction treatment. Suboxone is a partial opiate agonist, meaning it binds less strongly to the mu receptor. It also has other opioid properties other than the mu receptor. It can be taken at home. This is preferable for many patients who wish to avoid the daily pilgrimage to a treatment center and the stigma associated with that activity. It's also formulated in such a way as to discourage diversion. Dr. John Kelly.
I think we have to look to the evidence base, and this is what I think is very important. As much as possible, when we're trying to come up with good policy, rational policy, healthcare policy, it's very important to look to the evidence. Now, we have good evidence for methadone. We have good evidence for Suboxone, for buprenorphine, in terms of its ability to reduce infectious disease transmission, to reduce overdose deaths. And these are things, I think, are the most important things, is to make sure that we keep people alive, number one. Number two, can we stabilize them so that they have a chance to get into long-term recovery? And both of those medications have been shown to do that, and they're really first-line treatments. So when we're talking about opioid use disorder, we're really talking about the effectiveness of these medications as first-line treatment.
The drug is manufactured by Reckitt Benckiser Group, a British multinational consumer goods company whose current business is focused on health, hygiene, and home products. In 1960, this company, then called Reckitt Coleman, was concerned with developing a new analgesic to treat moderate pain. Newly recruited chemist Dr. John Lewis was tasked with the job, and he developed buprenorphine, which was brought to the United States as a painkiller in 1981. Interestingly, Lewis shipped buprenorphine to the narcotics farm in Lexington, Kentucky in the mid-1970s, so its abuse potential could be tested. By the time buprenorphine was being sold in the U.S., much had been learned about it, and it appeared to have great potential as a possible pharmacotherapeutic agent. My patients were abusing this drug alongside with their other opiates at that time. In 2002, the Food and Drug Administration approved buprenorphine, they called it Subutex, and Suboxone, a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone. The naloxone is to prevent diversion. It blocks the opiate effects if you take it. And while they were waiting for approval, the company lobbied Congress to create the Drug Addiction Treatment Act of 2000. This would enable physicians who had been properly trained to prescribe the drug to use it on an outpatient setting. Initially, approved physicians could treat only 10 patients. That seemed reasonable to me at the time because treating multiple addicts, particularly in various stages of withdrawal, is an extremely taxing and time-consuming and really needs a team of people. This now has been raised over time, and physicians are now allowed to manage 275 Suboxone patients at a time. I have many years of experience treating addicts. I could never manage this. I could never manage a tenth of that. A careful examination of Suboxone history reveals that the drug has benefited from a curious and public-private partnership between Britain and the U.S. government. Questions about this relationship have arisen, including at least one about its patent. Suboxone is made of 2 different ingredients. It is 4 parts buprenorphine and 1 part naloxone. This prevents, as I said, the diversion. When Suboxone came to market, both of these drugs were already classified as, quote, legacy drugs, which meant that not only their safety and efficacy had been well established, but they're off patent, meaning cheap. But because both drugs were widely available, Reckitt Benckiser was faced with marketing a drug which had little or no profit. It was cheap. It was at that point they successfully lobbied the FDA for orphan drug status. The designation is usually reserved for reward financial incentive for companies that produce medicines to treat rare illnesses and have little chance of earning a profit from it. It allows for 7 years of exclusivity before other pharmaceutical companies can develop cheaper, generic versions. Despite the fact that Suboxone became the source of a financial windfall for the company, the officials maintained that the orphan status was appropriate. Also helping the Suboxone cause, the United States government, scientists regarded this drug, bench scientists, not clinical scientists, as the holy grail when it comes to treating opiate addiction. The government helped finance 2 big clinical trials that were necessary to get that FDA approval, and the National Institute on Drug Abuse promoted the partnership between Britain and the U.S. government. Charles O'Keefe was president of Reckitt Benckiser at the time and responsible for the company's incorporation in the U.S., lobbied influential members of Congress to ensure the drug could be a take-home prescription. Not surprisingly, addicts like Suboxone. In fact, in the early research on the drug, where it was being suggested as a replacement therapy, it was noted in the scientific literature, addicts reported this as the most reinforcing drug they had ever taken. Suboxone began being widely used. The plan by the company was to tweak the formulation slightly and then present it in a new format, the sublingual strip. Reckitt Benckiser, armed with a weak, self-sponsored study, claimed the pill version wasn't tamper-proof enough as compared to the new version, and they tried to convince the FDA that this was a safety issue for children who might inadvertently eat the pill, as opposed to taking the sublingual tabs. Bob Forrest?
Now, what's interesting about the strip is doctors tell you to only take 2 milligrams. I've seen kids trying to cut the strip. Like, what the hell? How do you know? Why are patients cutting medications directed by doctors? Think about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the strips are very valuable on the street. They're $20 for an 8 milligram strip. That's a good profit. It's in the black market all over the United States. You can't solve a spiritual problem with drugs. That's what American Medical Association doesn't get. And I'm afraid our federal government doesn't get it.
The company was essentially aiming to kill its own product so that it could keep its stranglehold on 85% of the market with its new product and new designation. The strip version of the drug hit in 2010. The FDA did not agree with the company's claim and approved generic versions, despite the fact that generic drugs are no different than the brand name, than the Suboxone. Patients often feel the brands are superior, and even though there are cheaper generic versions available, they have been swamped by Reckitt Benckiser. Now, the suspicious timing did not go unnoticed, and they quickly found themselves at the center of a lawsuit that accused them of price fixing and product hopping. 35 states and the District of Columbia accused the company of using fear-based messaging and sham science to maintain their dominance. But in the end, the suit was thrown out. Suboxone was originally intended for short-term use, but many use it now to maintain patients. Because of its so-called ceiling effect, the drug won't get addicts high, but it does take the edge off between highs. With Suboxone, we have entered yet another era. We are treating drug addiction with addictive drugs. Patent medicines in the 1800s claimed to successfully treat addictions by swapping one drug for another, but truth was they were all used interchangeably. Laudanum was used to cure opium addiction, morphine was used to cure laudanum addiction, etc. The snake oil industry made countless millions with no good scientific basis for their claims until Samuel Hopkins Adams wrote his seminal series, The Great American Fraud, in 1905. Remember, we talked about this earlier, and brought awareness to the mess. As though nothing has been learned, however, we are once again embracing methadone in the 60s and now Suboxone. We continue the cycle of treating opiate addiction with opioids. Now, that is not to say that Suboxone doesn't have its use, nor to say that methadone doesn't have its use. Both could be potentially life-saving for certain patient populations. The problem is trying to determine who is a patient that we should be attempting to maintain on a replacement therapy, who is a patient that should be offered recovery. It's interesting that physicians are never treated with medication-assisted treatment. They are always abstinence-based because we all know that on these drugs, you are still altered. So if you're going to be an airline pilot, a lawyer, a doctor, magically you don't get the option of medication-assisted treatment, yet everybody else does? Well, some should, but we have not figured out yet exactly how to determine for whom we should be recommending abstinence approach, short-term medication-assisted treatment, or maintain medication-assisted treatment. A recent Drug Abuse Warning Network report showed that between 2005 and 2011, almost 1 million people went to the hospital for emergency treatment after taking combinations of opioids, benzodiazepines, and alcohol. One of my concerns is the addicts maintained on Suboxone are often not screened for other substances, which could be a life-threatening issue. Also, a recent study suggested that more than half of buprenorphine obtained through legitimate prescription is being diverted or used illegally.
I thank my guests, Dr. John Kelly, Dr. Anna Lembke, and Bob Forrest. Tune in next week as we explore possible solutions to the opioid crisis. I want to thank Michelle Poe and the staff of drdrew.com for helping us pull this series together. You can read it in its entirety at drdrew.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.